start out with Mattilda reading, but because Mattilda got both a rave in the New York Times and in the Washington Post, we discussed a little bit of celebratory bragging, I guess, for all of you who may not have seen these august publications today. A quote that is leaping out to me immediately is in the second paragraph of this Washington Post review. People say it's the Seattle freeze, like this is some kind of cute local popsicle flavor. But really, it's just the gentrified gaze, the suburban imagination in the urban environment, the white picket fence in the eyes. People don't come to cities for that surprising interaction anymore. They just want to redraw the borders of the places they aren't even escaping. It's such an amazing quote from the memoir. But then just before that, she says, many writers have tried to describe the chill of Seattle's social distance and aloof tendency that predates the pandemic. No one got it right until queer activist Mattilda Bernstein Sycamore. In the freezer door, an aching, playful memoir of vivid desire amid the desperation of midlife disconnection. Anyway, with that, I think let's hear from the playfulness herself. Mattilda, will you bless us with a reading?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for joining me, Alex. This is a tremendous honor, and I can't believe it happens on the same day that I get reviews in the New York Times and the Washington Post, which have never, ever, ever reviewed me before. So here we go. Let's join me on this ride. So when I'm in a regular reading, I always tell people to do whatever you need to take care of yourself. So if you need to jump up and down, laugh, cry, run out, buy 7 books, take your shoes off, have a snack, go to the bathroom, do it all. And in this case, of course, we're all in our own homes. So you probably already know that. But I think what I'd like to invoke is perhaps combining the comfort of our own homes with the possibility of being here in this imagined room together. So on that note, I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book after I take 1 sip of water. So this is like a signal. You can also take a sip of water. Okay. I'm also going to try to move around because when I stand still and just stare at a computer screen, I end up I'm like, whoa, my whole body is in pain afterwards. So if I move around, a little bit like this, it's just to stretch out my body so I'm not in pain. So let's not be in pain, right? All right, here we go. One problem with gentrification is that it always gets worse. But then I go into a Hooters and it's a vintage clothing store. A friend of mine is trying on breasts. This is why I like dreaming. I remember when faggots kissed hello. We had so much to fear, and so we feared nothing. I mean, we feared one another, but we feared fear more. Kissing one another on the lips, this was joyous and commonplace, a legacy we were inheriting, an art. How to stretch out our lips in front of our faces, how to queen it up in front of a loving or hostile public, how to emphasize connection or disdain. We kissed hello because we had to. We had to know we could kiss like this. A simple greeting, but something splendid and transgressive, even when mundane. Or that's what it felt like for me when I moved to San Francisco in '92, and I was 19. This kiss didn't necessarily feel like a radical act. It was just something you did if you were a faggot, whether in suit and tie or broadcasting the pageantry of outsider imagination. Was this something that united us? I wouldn't have said so then, but maybe I'm saying it now. Yes, they were the ones who turned their cheeks. Too good for this kiss unless they explain the sudden turn by mentioning a cold sore. One just starting or one in the past, whichever way, we hoped we were taking care. Sometimes you knew someone had really bad breath, but you kissed her on the lips anyway. It was okay to endure a little discomfort to avoid seeming snotty or scared. Unless this was one of those queens who would grab you and start feeling you up. That was a good reason to avoid contact. You kissed the ones you loved and the ones you didn't even like that much. Sometimes even someone you hated, just so you wouldn't seem shady. Too much garlic was never a problem. We kissed anyway. We kissed the living and the dying, knowing that the dying were part of the living, and we wanted to keep them with us. Maybe this was a dream. I mean, I know it wasn't a dream then, but maybe it is now. Now we're more afraid of one another. So even the gestures of intimacy disappear. Most of the time, I don't even think of kissing someone hello anymore. I reach for a hug if possible, and this can be beautiful too, but in a different way. How strange to think that in the early 90s, when it felt like everyone was dying, we were less fearful in certain ways. When I'm washing my hair in the shower, and suddenly I think, what the hell am I doing? Oh, I'm in the shower. This is one of the things I do in the shower. Sometimes repetition leads to revelation, and sometimes revelation leads to repetition, which leads to no revelation ever again. You know when you notice someone's looking at you, but you're not sure. So you do the same thing you were just doing, so you don't look like you're looking. I was holding a piece of chewed up licorice root in front of my face in between two fingers, getting ready to throw it out the window. He lit a cigarette. I hate cigarettes, but that's the place for them, downstairs and outside and away from my window. He crossed the street, looked back, waited. So then I literally leaned out the window. He came back. Eventually I said, do you want to come up? And he did. That's when I knew my life could start again. There's a certain kind of knowledge, growing up in a particular body, socialized to be a particular thing you will never be. Knowing this and learning to grow with it instead of against. Maybe I'm saying we all need different kinds of people in our lives, right? When anything becomes homogenous, there's a problem. When anything becomes so homogenous that people don't even think about it, that's worse. I used to live in a neighborhood where no one belonged. And so we all belonged. Now, I live in a neighborhood where faggots look at me like I don't belong. And so I don't. Soon, they won't belong either. But this won't make anything better. There's too much desire without desire. Too much desire for desire. Not enough desire. Sometimes we remember the dead and forget the living dead. And sometimes we forget everything. We make art so we don't die. And still we die. Silence is a kind of memory, but memory should never be a form of silencing. Maybe there are exceptions. I know a process can be collective and a collective can be in process, but what about a collective process without collective process? Knowing the gap between what you want and what you yearn for, can there be hope in this? Maybe I'm saying that yearning often comes from spurning. the brokenness from that glance, the desire for seamlessness. Maybe there's no way not to be broken, only a way not to feel broken. Thank you.
Whew. Wow, what a place to end that reading on. I was trying to quote tweet it. I'll get to that later. Anyway, so what brought this on?
The book itself.
Yeah.
So I guess in a way, well, when I start writing a book, I never really know what I'm doing. So I just write with no particular intention. But I think when I knew kind of where it was going was when it became kind of an exploration of how to bring desire in the present back into my life. You know, I realized I was living in radical queer worlds that were a place for my intellect and for my analysis, but not necessarily for my embodiment. So in the way the book starts with an exploration of kind of going into spaces that I already know are corrupt, in many cases gay bars, in order to find what isn't, because I need that, you know, and I think in the book I talk about this one particular experience when I'm in this gay bar and I start talking to people and they're like, who are you? We've never seen you. Do you live here? And I'm like, yeah, I live here, but I don't go to bars, you know? And they're like, why? And I was like, oh, you know, I don't drink. I can't deal with smoke. I can't even handle smoke machines. I have all these chronic health problems. And in that moment, I sense all the things I know, right? There's the shade, there's the shame, there's the sadness, but also there's a sweetness. And I think in a way, the book is a search for that sweetness, both inside my body, in the world, and out in public.
I'm remembering a sequined mini dress that I think you wore, like the big mermaid scale sequins at the Hugo House event that we did together with, I think, Kristen Valdez. Like this was like 2016 maybe. Is this ringing?
Oh, you mean the reading we did together at Hugo House? Yes, absolutely, yeah. Yes.
Like when you talk about your when you talk about the pleasures of the body, like, you know, the queer body, I think of that dress as you're talking about it, for example. And I think that would, for me, that was always one of the pleasures of going out, was like putting together an outfit, you know, like out of what you had in your closet, what you had on the floor, what somebody left behind, you know, like what you may have appropriated, you know, those kinds of pleasures to me are like among the things that I miss, you know, that I missed, I think, even before that it felt like they were lost to gentrification in a sense, because suddenly everyone seems so in need of looking. I think Dale Peck said everybody suddenly wants, like, thinks it's cool to look rich. You know, and I feel like this book feels like a response to that way that people were gentrifying not just neighborhoods, but like their physical appearances, like just the whole thing. Is that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for me, the dream of the city is the place where you find everyone and everything that you never imagined, right? So it's that unexpected encounter on the street. It's the thing that you don't want to happen that ends up changing you. It's the person you're talking to, you know, in line at the store. You know, it's the sex you have in the park. It's it's all of those moments. And so I think in a way, the book, and Seattle, I think in many ways is, it's a caution. I mean, it's true in all of our gentrified cities now, but there's this mentality where, you go outside and where it's an urban environment, but the way people are looking at you is with this white picket fence, in their eyes. It's this suburbanized mentality where people don't want unplanned interaction. They don't want that surprising moment, right? Like for example, now I'll be like, stretching on a tree. And I talk about this in the book too, or like leaning against a hedge and people are looking at me like I am not even human, right? I cannot, possibly exist in their world. And I think for me, the book in a sense is a resistance to that. I want that dream of the city to exist, and even if it's being pushed, marginalized, destroyed, demolished every day by gentrification, by consumerism, by commodification, by assimilation, I still am trying to find that, even if it's just in like a moment, right? So, and actually, it's interesting you mentioned that reading at Hugo House, because that was a moment when I figured out an arc for the book, because the piece that I read that was like, when I read that, there was a prompt and it was animals, and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to write about animals, but the good thing about a prompt is you just write what you want, right? And so I ended up writing, and I realized when I read that part at that reading, I was like, oh, this is somewhere towards the end of the book. It's not exactly in the end now, but I felt that kind of arc. And so I think that's another type of public engagement that means something, where you're engaging with your work in the public space. But yeah, the book is about all those moments, in a sense, when people let down their guard and let someone else in. And in this case, maybe it's me, but often I'm not let in. And so it's also about those moments of betrayal and annihilation and longing and loss, and but still trying anyway. I guess that's what I would say.
Do you think of this book as kind of an intervention with Seattle? With queer Seattle in particular?
Yeah, I do think, I just think Seattle, period. Like you read that part about the Seattle freeze. And so, people in Seattle, the Seattle freeze, it's what I'm talking about, the sort of white picket fence in the eyes. But people invoke it here, like, oh, it's just the Nordic heritage, and like the Nordic heritage in Seattle is something like 8 or 9 or 10% of Seattle at this point. I think there are actually more Jews in Seattle now than people of Nordic heritage. And no one talks about the Jewish heritage, right? And so, but people don't recognize it as gentrification. And I've lived here 3 times. So I lived here first just for a month in 94. And I also lived here in 96, 97. And that term did not exist. And that mentality also did not exist. And it is that tech, mentality that I'm just going to look at the phone, or I'm going to look at the world as if it is my computer screen, right? And I mean, now we're looking at our computer screens like they are the world, but for a reason, right? But not when we are in the world, And so I think for me, the book is really, it came about like I'm trying to stay alive, and that's why I write, right? And so, and I want to write towards, the book is structured by feeling. So I'm writing towards embodiment, towards longing, towards desire, towards even towards loss in a sense, and that's because I want to express everything, in all of its complications. And I think gentrification doesn't allow that, and assimilation doesn't allow that. And so yes, in that sense, it's an intervention, but I didn't write it in that way. I wrote it because I was trying to have an embodied self in a world that doesn't allow it. So that's like a world of, mainstream gay people. I live in the gay neighborhood, but these gays do not want me in. I see them on the street and they're like, whoa, whoa. They go right away, and they do not have a glamorous background like that. Trust me. But they're everywhere, you know. But it's also just Seattle itself, you know. And by Seattle, I don't just mean Seattle because, you know, when I was in San Francisco 2 years ago, San Francisco is the place that formed me, and it formed me because it has always been, like, starting when I moved there when I was 19 in 92. The place where I could just be walking down the street and I would see people who recognized me. Like people, and by recognize me, I don't mean they knew me. I mean they knew that I was another weirdo and, you know, someone on the fringe who was trying to exist in a non-mainstream, like anti-establishment way. And like, that's gone. You know, it does not exist. It's not that those people are gone. Those people exist, but that mentality is not there. It's the same mentality where people are looking at their phone or they're like stepping across the street so they don't have to see you, you know? And so in a way, I'm speaking against that mentality everywhere.
I wanted to engage in a little bit of an exercise, if which is, can you tell us about what you're wearing?
Sure. Okay, so what I'm wearing.
Your clothes are always so. I mean, the memory I have, for example, of that dress. I also remember like what you wore when we did an event for my book in 2018. Like I have these very specific Mattilda clothes memories. So I'd like to officially ask you about where those clothes came from.
Sure. I mean, I get almost all my clothes from thrift stores or from vintage stores or from consignment shops. And for me, I guess I love contrast, in case you can't tell. I love color and I love, to me, like I want to express, you know, something wild and weird, you know, and wacky to bring people in. And to bring but more importantly, I think, because it does help me to feel embodied and it helps me to feel alive and it helps me to see myself, I think. You know, I think like as queer kids growing up in a world that wants us to die or disappear, you know, we're told to camouflage everything, right? And so coming of age, you know, as a queer person, like part of that was about, you know, figuring out a self that wasn't dependent on a world that wanted me dead, you know, and it wasn't dependent on that world's approval. And that means, you know, straight or gay normalcy. And so, yeah, I like to link some things together. So in this ensemble, yeah, these things are all really from thrift stores. One thing that's great about thrift stores is when I can't find anything, I can usually find a weird tie. So I have all these wacky ties. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, in a way. I think it's the thing I guess that I'm thinking about is like an experience of, yeah, just that experience of like knowing that you're putting together clothes to send signals, like about who you are, the communities you belong to, that kind of thing, who you want to meet, and who you might want to talk to, who you don't want to talk to. Also, those clothes send out those signals too. It's like a ship decorated with flags headed down the street, you know. But they're flags also that come from these. You know, I think of thrift shopping in Seattle as being like one of those. That was one of those Olympic sport events in like the 90s, right? Like great thrift shopping in Seattle, San Francisco, Tucson was another place where you could expect to like really find amazing things. Portland, and for New York, and Domsies in New York City and Brooklyn. Oh my God, I miss Domsies so much. I don't know if you ever got there, but anyway, it's part. I think it is part of that. You know, I was noticing. I think a friend of mine was tweeting about how because of the gentrification of thrift stores, that like poor people can't afford a lot of stuff um, that's at Goodwill anymore because the prices have gone up at Goodwill. Like, uh, it's a, and I don't know if you've noticed that also in thinking about Seattle, the way, like the places that you find your identity in those clothes, has that moved on too, or?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think I've never found what I wanted necessarily at thrift stores, except with going 100 times. So, or actually the best things I find are the things where I'm like, will I ever wear this? You know, I'm like, I don't think so, but I'm actually this little vest thing. It was one of those things I was like, I don't know, but it does fit well. So probably I'll work it. And now it's one of my favorite things. So, and I think, I feel like places like Goodwill is an example of, everything that's wrong with the world, right? Because this is, everything they get is donations. It's all free. They have CEOs, they have multiple CEOs that make more than several $100,000 a year, regional CEOs, like 300,000, 400,000. Their main CEO makes like 1.2 million. And meanwhile, they have armed guards in some of their stores to prevent people from stealing things they got for free, right? So that's everything that's wrong with the world. But I do agree, yeah, in the past there were stores where you could find things that now you can't find. But for me, that just makes it more challenging, and I'm open to the challenge.
I kind of want you to like walk to the back of your room and come back a little bit of runway just before I ask the next question.
Well, okay, I could try a little
Not
bit.
to objectify you.
I don't know if you'll be able to see once I get, but we'll try.
Okay.
I guess.
All right.
How was that, darling?
That was good. Thank
I
you.
could turn. Pose. Here we go. The book is out.
Right. I'm looking on page 27 of the eGalley. Now I'm in another gay bar. I knew it would be awful, but I didn't know it'd be this awful. When someone asks, "What's your real name?" you might be in the wrong place. When 4 different people ask, "What's your real name?" you're definitely in the wrong place. Then there's the queen who says, "Are you a boy or a girl?" Just kidding. People at gay bars have really. This queen was dating someone who had my haircut. He was 25 and she thought he really liked her, but then he said she was too feminine and short. I am short, she says. Every gay bar is an accidental comedy routine. The best comedy routine is the one that takes itself seriously. Are there, so you were talking about your feeling of being alienated from bars, but it seems like you were still going to them at least until COVID, yes or no?
Yeah, well, actually, the book is really, it does start with that moment where I was like, I need something here. And what that is a world with other fags where I can have an embodied self, and there still are not that many worlds, I think, that exist like that, in spite of all of the hideous hierarchies and, backward mentalities. So it started in one particular bar in Seattle, which is Pony. But so it's both invoking and challenging the hypocrisy in those spaces. Or invoking the possibility and challenging the hypocrisy. Not invoking the hypocrisy. But I think in the end, actually, the thing that actually, way before COVID, that really drove me out of these spaces, because I mean, one thing also is the time when I feel the most alive is dancing. And that's always been the case. That's when I'm me. That's like, there's nothing but me there. And so I would go to Pony and I would just dance it out. It was just me dancing like half the time, 3/4 of the time. But I'm there, I'm just like, and nothing else matters. And but the reason I stopped going to bars, which is after the book, I mean, in the book, I'm still there, but it's because of the smoke and the smoke machines. Like even people smoking outside, it's destroyed me. And the smoke machine, that bar is like the size of my living room and they have a smoke machine. I'm like, come on, this is tired. but more than tired, it will leave me with like a drill going through my headache for like weeks, And so, and I feel like, and that actually, to bring it into a larger sense, bars are not places where people are trying to take care of one another. So we have to know that. No one is trying to take care of you, and they will never be that, ever. Like, in spite of what people try to invoke, never, in my experience. I mean, someone else might have that experience. People want to get high, they want to get drunk, they want to have sex. These are all good things, you know what I'm saying? But like, they do not want to take care of one another. And that'll never be the case. And that's the saddest part for me. But that's the saddest part of everyone, and especially gay or queer sexual spaces. I've never been in a sexual space where people are actually trying to take care of one another. It may exist, but I've never been in.
Yeah, I feel like this is a really old thing for queer folks that I remember, like from my first days as like a young thing, going out in New York and San Francisco. People would say things like, they would complain about having to pay cover charges. They would complain about the drinks. They would complain about people being drunk. They would complain about it just like went on and on and on and on. And so then at some point someone would be like, well, a bar is not a community center. But then the community centers were not usually like, shall we say, I think San Francisco finally did get one, but when I was there, it was just like this thing that was going on forever. Like people would just laugh and say, well, I don't know, just go to Cafe Flore, but like not everyone could afford a latte, it was really just this way in which it was very hard for people to conceive of what you're talking about. Like, how do we take care of each other, And I think only in the last 10 years have I really noticed a change among my friends of people really actually actively trying to look out for each other, talking about like, how do we change queer culture so that it does make more room for like ways that the community can care for each other. And I actually feel like that's something that I think is coming along as a part of like the intergenerational conversation that the internet makes possible, where like you and I can have a conversation about what it was like in the 90s, for example, and there are people here in the room who were with us then, and then there are people here who weren't even born then, and it's all just like a conversation that's happening, and that's actually, I think, beautiful to me. I wonder if you're having any of those kinds of experiences.
Well, I feel like I'm always open to any kind of connection in whatever way it takes place. And I feel like I always want to write against nostalgia because I don't think there ever was a golden age. And if we always believe in a golden age, we can never create one now. So I always think there are possibilities. We're living in the dominant colonial power in the world. Our lives are predicated in destruction of the entire world. But we still have to challenge that and create something else. And I've always believed in that. And that those are always the people I'm looking for. But I do think I think what you're saying is refreshing, but I also think the larger scale for me is not a positive one. It is a positive one in the sense of like gender identities. There's so much more possibility for like gender fluidity, for trans, gender queer, non-binary defiance in the world. And it is possible. There are certain things that I think are more visible, but I think the overall thing is really a commodification and a consolidation and a whitewashing and a clampdown. That's what I feel more than anything else. But yes, I do believe, like in the possibility of like the moment we're having now. I mean, why I write a book is so that people can, feel like I write towards vulnerability so that people can express their own vulnerabilities, and so that together we can create something else.
I like that, writing towards vulnerability. What were you afraid of when you were writing this for yourself, or what did you come across that that made you pause or react, that made you feel vulnerable?
I feel like probably the whole thing. I mean, because for me, because I always am writing I'm writing the things that I'm afraid to say, like the things where I'm like, oh my God, if I say this, I might die, you know? And the reason I write that is so that I don't die. And then I can look at it and be like, and sometimes in some ways, I'm more vulnerable in my writing than I am sometimes with other people if they don't meet the vulnerability. Because like, you can only try so hard to be vulnerable with someone who never opens up, you know? And or like, you love them, they're like a great friend, you know, you enjoy being with them, but how many times can you like open yourself up with them not responding? And I find that a lot. But in my writing, I can do that on my own terms. So I think writing about rape or being raped, or times when I feel the boundary between consent and not consent is skewed, that's challenging. I think writing about people I know is always makes me worried in a way, or like afraid. But I like I say in the book, like how can I write about without writing about people I might love, you know? And so if I'm writing about intimacy and desire, I'm also writing about people I know, you know, and this is always the case. I always give them the manuscript before it comes out if they're in the book in a substantive way. But I think also writing about things like that. I think writing about, but basically for me, I always look for what is the scariest to write, and I might write it, you know, like this. In my writing in this book, I wanted to maintain a very like spontaneous style, but I edited it 15 times. You know, like this started as a manuscript of 1,000 pages, and now it's like, you know, 200 and something pages, but some of the pages are one sentence. So I'm like editing, but I'm editing towards vulnerability, like. And you know, some of the reasons why the page breaks or the text like doesn't hold anymore, it's when I get to that place where my analysis or my feelings can no longer exist, you know? And so that's why I like language, you know, language, like I'm writing into the gaps where the language can't hold so that I can find more language.
I like that a lot. You know, I think it was interesting. I'm writing a review where I'm trying to think about like, what are writers even for? You know, and I feel like there's this way in which American writers are asked to be like these kind of perfectible capitalist machines, marketable, and writing things that amuse and entertain, and but in the meantime, like on the other side of it, I think what those of us who I'm thinking of, you know, like in relationship to this idea, is like we're all trying to do that, to say those things that if we don't say them, we might feel like we might die, or we feel like somebody else might die. You know, that there's a daredevil act happening on the page that makes space for new worlds and new possibilities in life. You know, that it's not that's what is at stake. We have some questions. I'm gonna. It's just about time now for us to turn to our friends in the gallery view.
That sounds wonderful. Let me respond quickly to that, and then I can't wait for these other questions. But one thing you just said, I think is really important, because like I've always written against, you know, all of that commodification and that way of thinking of the literary world, and I've never been in it. And the thing that is shocking to me in this moment is that this book, I think, is probably in many ways, certainly stylistically, my most challenging book, and the book that is most on my own terms, and that refuses to like toe the line of any kind of literary mainstream. You know, refuses plot, it refuses the standard page, it refuses narrative, it refuses to capitulate to any of those kind of norms. And the fact that this may mark a moment, I don't know, but just that I, to have these glowing, amazing, really rigorous, and really deep reviews in the Washington Post and the New York Times on the same day, like, is shocking and amazing. And I don't know what that speaks to exactly, except I will just say that, my first book came out 20 years ago. I've never been in these publications. And if I can be accepted on my own terms, I'm ready, And so I don't know where I'm going with that, but just maybe to say that I really think that we always need to write what we need and not what they want us to write.
Yeah, and it costs a lot of people like $6,000 to $8,000 a month in an independent publicist to get that kind of review attention. All right, and now to the questions. Joseph Osmondson. The notion of writing against the golden age. I'm from near Seattle, and the city has always sucked. It's always been incredibly racist and had a sort of soft capitalist white supremacy that values silence and conformity. Seattle is and always has been occupying land that doesn't belong to us white folks. How do we challenge gentrification all while not pretending that things were really better before, just differently bad?
Yeah, I think those are great questions. And I think that would apply to any of our gentrified cities, in the US. For me, one of the ways, and is by like for me, like I said before, like the reason to be in this city is to find people who are not like you, to have experiences that like shock you or transform you. And so in a way, the simplest way is just to exist in the world and communicate with other people in an open way. And so that's just on the very like baseline, on the baseline level. The other things are like creating community that is always about protecting, nurturing, transforming the people who are the most marginalized. Like I think community, especially in queer worlds, is always defined by the people who have the most power. It's the same thing, in the broader sense, right? And so if everything were turned around, if we weren't like, oh my God, we're feeling vulnerable, call the cops, right? Who do the cops protect? Like the cops protect, white supremacy. They protect the status quo. So if it's like taking things into our own hands and creating alternatives while also challenging the violence around us, I think that's what I always believe in.
I just wanted to add, LK, it says that you have, in the chat, it says you have a question and there's a colon, but I don't see the question. If you were trying to type something, please drop your question in the chat. Griff Hans is next. I absolutely love what Mattilda said about the white picket fence in their eyes. How do you receive that look? Where does it land in you? What do you think it's doing or trying to do to you and others who are other in gentrified spaces?
Yeah, thank you. I think I try not to receive it. And I think the best way to react for me is to do whatever I'm doing and make it 3 times grander. Like actually just recently, I was walking to, actually it was just today. I was in the park, there was no one around. And I was like, let me feel these reviews, because I was like, before I was just kind of frantic. I was like, I don't know. I was like, let me feel it. It was raining. And I just was like, hey, just hooray, just like screamed. And someone like she's like walking her dog, like, I don't know, like 150 feet away from me. And I get closer and I see her just like looking at me like this. And I'm like, hi. So for me, that's the best way. It's not always possible, or like the same thing. I lean against shrubs to like even out my body. And like people are like, what are you doing? So I'm like, oh, I just lean against the shrub. But I think where it lands in my body, if I let it in, is it's in my chest, it's in my abdomen. And that's where I store everything. And it like makes my body, it makes it hard to breathe, and it makes it so that I can't breathe, I would say. And I think, to be honest, and I think that is the goal. That is the goal of that gaze. Is the way that people look at you is they want you gone. They don't want you to exist. But I say, we can't let them do that, whoever they are. So I'm trying my best.
Eugene Massey asks, how does the freezer door fit in relationship with your other books? In what ways might it be similar or different?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, I think as I've, the trajectory of my writing has been, in my opinion, I think more and more vulnerable. So I think, well, let me think a second. I think it fits in with the end of San Francisco in the sense, the end of San Francisco, I'm searching through my formative moments. And this idea of San Francisco as a refuge for radical queer visions and community building, and as a place for the fringe, and all the times that's let me down over and over and over, and how I still believe in it. In this book, I no longer believe in it. And I just mean that dream. I believe that we need to create it, but I don't believe it exists, in the world. And so I think in a way, the book is starting from a place of loss. And it's existing in the loss. And trying to move into the embodied feeling of the loss in order to, and I think also, I guess, as queers, we're often taught, like, or told, like, desire is what's got us here, right? And so I think if desire got me to a place of like walls, and then maybe, I don't know, something's wrong, right? And so in some ways it's about reimagining that and trying to get through the walls. But I think that the other thing, I think structurally, it's more fragmented. So like when I wrote The End of San Francisco, I don't know if I was familiar with, like, I struggled with, what do I call this book, right? I called it a memoir because I felt like calling it nonfiction, it starts with visiting my father before he died of terminal cancer, after telling him I would never speak to him again because he had sexually abused me. And it starts in that sobbing and that vulnerability. And I felt like it was more vulnerable as nonfiction. So I called it a memoir, even though it's structured more like an experimental novel. This book I would see as a lyric essay in the sense that it incorporates, structurally all of these disparate elements. So poetry, nonfiction, memoir, criticism, fiction, it's all there at once. And so maybe that's the trajectory. And it's also, at certain points in the book, the text just breaks and it becomes a conversation between an ice cube and an ice cube tray, And so maybe that's not nonfiction, I'm not sure. But yeah, so I guess in some ways it's kind of, I guess I write what I need in order to stay alive. And so in this book, I'm very much in the present. And the present is not our present right now, of course, because publishing is a little slower than that, right? But it's the present moment in which I'm existing in the world and trying to have an embodied self.
Beautiful. Blake Nemec asks, since you write a lot about embodiment, and I deeply relate to that effort, which topics of desire do you not find language for, or the language you are attracted to? That's quite a Rubik's Cube of a question, Blake.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that I don't know that which aspects of desire do I not have the language for? I might not be able to answer. I think desire always encompasses so much that I would say the desire in the moment is so much more expansive than when I think of desire, right? When I'm like, what do I want? I don't know it until I'm there. And I think when I'm there, it's a whole experience of the world. It's like I'm only in that desire and I'm simultaneously so much more present in the world. So I guess that's what I'm looking to try to create all the time.
And then Alana asks, for both Mattilda and Alex, favorite books you have read this year?
I loved The Shame by McKenna Goodman. Say that again.
She's my neighbor. She lives across the street from me here in Vermont.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Tell her. Wave to her for me, please.
I absolutely.
I loved Begin Again by Eddie Glaude. I know there's some others. What about you, Alex?
Well, I can say that, let's see. Well, this book, for one. I mean, I think something that I had a lot of, I had such an emotional reaction, even just to the first page about like kissing hello and thinking about like, just thinking about the the ways, all these little ways that we existed, that I felt like you were, the book is constantly sending off these little prismatic moments of revelation, about things that I thought I already knew, like that, you know. And so it was really a beautiful thing for me to think about that way. And you know, I think what was interesting to me about my reading this year was that I started out the year working on a review of Paul Lysicki's memoir later, which I think these pair beautifully together. Like you could have a lot of fun reading the two. They're definitely like eyeing each other in the park. I think I loved McKenna's book also, which was so it felt like a total exercise in freedom, like this very short exercise in literary freedom. It was really pure and beautiful that way. I loved Sigrid Nunez's new book, which, you know, if you read The Friend and you were like, I want more of that, like Sigrid Nunez's new book is also something to get into. It was a great year for books, really. Like How Much of These Hills Are Gold, C. Pan Zhang. E.J. Ko's The Magical Language of Others, which is this like startlingly incredible memoir. Anyway, but there's and then Luster as well, the novel by Raven Leilani. So there's lots of, it was just I'm not even getting to everything I'm thinking about. The 13th Balloon, Mark Bibbins. also would go well with your book.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are.
Well, I love these companions. I think these are perfect companions.
Do we have? I think we are at the hour here. So, is there anything you want to send us off with? Do you have a playlist for the freezer door? Like recommended listening?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'm gonna have to think about that. I do talk about LCD sound systems several times in the book, but I don't know if that should be the playlist. But one thing I will say is, of course, I'm on tour. It's a virtual tour. And so if you liked this reading, please tell your friends to come to my other event. I'm reading a different excerpt at every reading, and there'll be a different person in conversation. And yeah, next Monday, I'll be reading in Baum's A Room with a View series. That'll be in conversation with Jordy Rosenberg. So yeah, tell your friends. Thanks for coming tonight. Please order the book tonight from McNally Jackson. And thank you, Alex, for this amazing conversation. Thank you, Maris, for hosting me. And thank you to everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. Oh, and can we kiss each other goodbye? So let's do it, maybe.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.